So yes, hi and welcome again to my talk about principles of effective developers. I hope you can see, yes, my ASCII art slides. So don't worry, I'm not a big fan of slides. So actually, this is another thing for me of being effective. I don't write, I don't create many PowerPoint or Google Docs slides. I'm not a fan of that. So just very quickly about myself, my name is Sebastian. I mostly do Java things. So I'm a Java champion and all kinds of other Java titles involved. But today I'm not talking too much about only Java, but in general, how to become more effective as a developer. And there are a few things that we can focus on. And the very first thing I want to start out with is automation. Because for me, automation is a very important topic, and I think I cannot stress enough how much we should actually leverage automation, because automation for me means using the computer in the correct way, because the computer is just much faster at doing certain things. And it also helps me in my job a lot because I'm self-employed, so I'm a freelancer, so the only person, a one-man show. So if I have to write some invoices or do some handling of documents or whatever, if I'm not using automation, then I cannot work because I don't have a team of anybody else. It's just me, so I have the computer for support. But also, when we think of automation, we maybe think of some business processes or some maybe shell scripts that we write. But if we think about it, using automation means also, well, doing automation for small things. So, for example, something as a shortcut. And that's another important thing. If you use, well, anything in your computer, especially the tools that we should use as a developer, like your IDE, your command line, maybe even your browser, things like that, there's probably a shortcut for that. And these two things I want to show you just with some examples. Of course, I will use some code examples in the IDE. And for example, if we create some class in our IDE of choice, of course, that's IntelliJ, right? The best IDE out there. So I'm not, biased. I might be biased, but I think that's just true. And anything that we do, basically, we can use as a shortcut. So shortcuts and automation are much more than we would think about it. So how did I just create this class? Well, I didn't write this myself, right? I didn't write package and so on and so forth. A public class, some class, I, of course, used some automation. So in this case, I just went to the navigation and said, okay, please create a new Java class. Okay. And then things like that, that's also automation. So in IntelliJ, these things are called live templates. And it's not actually important how they are called or how you use them in your specific IDE. What I want to show you, or what I want to point out, is just this way of thinking that there are certain steps, doesn't matter if it's a big step or a small step, that we do all the time. There are certain boilerplate snippets that we keep typing all the time. There are certain actions that we do all the time. So for example, when you say, in the morning when I open up my computer, I always start up the same 3 programs, Well, you can automate this, especially if you're on a Linux system, but a little bit more on that in a second. But also these things, right? If we always, create code like that, we say system out, all of that stuff. But I'm not want to show you only a Hello World example on how to do these live templates, but especially also templates or live templates for your custom code. So for example, if I'm in a enterprise Java world, like I'm using Quarkus or some other technology, we always use dependency injection, right? And I always am writing, and it sounds like a minor optimization, but these things matter over time, because over time it adds up. Things like add, inject, and you select the correct import, right? And then you have to press enter. So with this, there's just a faster way around by saying, well, if I set up a live template and I already use the correct import here, it will just automatically do this for me. Or if I say this for some reason needs to be an application scope bean, or maybe something like a JAX-RS method, things like that. So all of that is just available with so-called live templates, and these don't come out of the box. I defined them for myself because I use these things all the time. But the point is not to use them, but to think about, well, what am I doing all the time there? And then, of course, there are many other shortcuts and methods that our IDE is just much better at. So for example, if we say, if we have some method like do this and then do that. If I would like to take these 2 lines of code and then, well, make a method out of it, so to extract them into a method, well, you probably know that you can, right-click, refactor, extract method to do this. So to do this and that, which is better than copy and pasting yourself, right? Why? Because, well, again, using automation, if we think about it here, if we do something as simple as, well, taking this and extracting a method out of it, actually there are 2 steps involved. One is the step that we as a human should think about. It's like the hard thinking involved. That is like, oh, which of these lines should I take and extract, and what is a good name for this method, and what should be the signature of this method. All of this is, the work that we should do as a developer. And then the second part of it is executing the work, just doing it. And for doing it, the computer is much better, because the computer is faster and it's more reliable than we are. So for that, of course, it makes more sense. And if you've done it a few times, then you don't want to right-click, refactor, extract method. You will see that, for example, on a Windows or Linux keyboard layout in IntelliJ, that's Control-Alt-M. So you do this and say, do this and that, and then there you go. So this is just much faster. And by the way, IntelliJ is really not good at that, because this, well, keyboard concept, as I would call it, really makes sense. So for example, this is Control-Alt-M for method, Control-Alt-P for parameter, Control-Alt-C for constant, and all of this. And this is really what I like about tools like that, where you see that somebody really thought about it. So it's really professionally created with some sort of keyboard, keyboard concept, where this really makes sense. It's actually also true if you look at any of the menus. So all of the menus, including, this navigation bar and all of that stuff, is usable with the keyboard. You don't even have to touch your mouse, and actually you shouldn't. But, well, there's another tip on that later. So if we think about it, automation really makes sense already for the tools that you're using. So how I would think about it is as to become a power user of these tools, right? To say, okay, I really want to become an expert at the tools that I have to use for my job, because it's like my job. We are professionals at that, right? So what is it that I can improve this game on how to use IntelliJ, for example, if that's what you use? Well, then look at the shortcuts that there are available. Look at some features that might be helpful for you. So for example, use this refactoring features instead of doing all of that stuff yourself. And this is really, really helpful. If you even just start with renaming and delegating things, like for example, extracting method variables and so on and so forth, that is just a really, really big plus. And then you will just take it from there. And then just really start with the easy keyboard shortcuts. So that is just very helpful. Then if you have some other tools that you need to use every day, try to do that as well. So for example, with your browser, you can go and just find out the shortcuts for that. And even if it's just, Control Tab and Control W, Control T, and all of these things for the Chrome browser, that just helps you. It makes your life more effective. So there's probably a shortcut for whatever you're doing. And especially the first 2 tips, I think, are just really important to increase your productivity there. And then that's another helpful and cool tip that I like a lot. Use not the force, but use the command line. Especially if you are on a Unix system and you have a Unix command line, like a proper one, then you can do pretty much anything that the computer can do using your command line. I like to use this one, that's Z Shell. That's also the standard now on a Mac OS-based system, but I'm running on actually it's called Arch Linux system with i3 window manager. So just because, in case you're wondering why my setup looks so weirdly, well, also because I can use it then quite quickly. And what is quite nice is, first of all, just, try to use the command line for stuff that you do all the time. So for example, if I say I quickly want to go to my Quarkus project, well, what do we do in a Java project, right? We always make some, Maven commands, like Maven clean install, or maybe you want to have a different command like Maven clean package, or only package without the clean, or maybe you want to say, well, Maven clean package, and then of course, skip the tests, right? That's something what we write all the time. Well, now, if you think about it, this is something you keep typing all over again in your command line if you use the command line for these tools. You can also use your IDE, but I would just encourage you to actually try out the command line versions, at least to get familiar with them. And then there are a few tips to get really productive. So one is to use aliases. So instead of typing maven clean package all the time, you just type an alias that gets expand, and then you hit this. So, well, I have some failing tests, I guess. And the same is true for things like git status, because it's just much faster. And this is just really helpful to be much faster. So it's the same if you say, well, you use Kubernetes, right? So if you use Kubernetes or Docker to build something, how many times do you actually have to write something like kube control get pods, or Docker build, or podman build, or podman ps? It's the same like Docker podman, by the way. So just trying to look at these commands that you keep typing all the time and trying to find an alias for it. And you don't have to be fancy with this. Over time, you will notice which ones you are actually typing, and then you become just much faster. So that's a very important tip for using the command line more efficiently. Another helpful tip is just to try to get used to a few shortcuts, especially the ones for navigation. So what I'm using, you probably know about this shortcut, Control L, which clears, very helpful. And then I set one, which is Control K, that also displays the current directory. So if we have a file and maybe a directory, maybe another one, then I can just quickly display them with Control K, or I can display the hierarchy with Control H and something like that. So, there are just a few shortcuts that I define for myself to be able to navigate a little bit faster. If you want to have a look at that, I will point you to some more resources at the end of this presentation. But just in general, don't be afraid of the command line. It's really a big improvement if you use this more effectively. And then especially if you're trying to use it in such a way that you say you use your default tools like that. Let's just start up my Quarkus application here real quick. If I say, for example, you have a tooling like your local host curl tooling that then you can combine with something. I actually don't know what I can invoke here. Yes, this health check, for example, that comes in a JSON form. So I can go and then combine it with some tooling, like, for example, this pipe JQ, and then say, okay, now get the status here. And then you see up. Get this, just name it up and whatever, and do a base 64 encoding, whatever makes sense here, right? So you can combine commands, and you can do, this is called piping. You can also have a look at, subshell commands and other sort of automations and sort of commands that really help you once you open up this world of the Unix command line. So this is just a very, very helpful tool as a developer, especially just to, get a little bit more a little bit more into things to improve your automation game, so to say, a little bit. So I just found, these sort of tools really helpful. If you're interested, especially in command line usage, I will also point you to some more material. But just I found that this tip in general is just a helpful one. Like, don't be afraid of the command line. You can use this a little bit more, trying to get used to some commands, like you can start with Maven and Git maybe, and then for these commands that you use all the time, define aliases. This is already a very big help, and then you can take it from there. And a little bit connected to that, another tip I want to definitely give you is to just in general spend more time on the keyboard. And there is a reason for that. So, of course, there are a lot of big fanboys of using great keyboards, or fanboys and fangirls, and I'm one of them. So definitely, I'm a big fan of using the keyboard in general, and I also spend a lot of money on some nice keyboards. But why is it that we as developers tend to like spending time on the keyboard as opposed to the mouse? Well, it's not that the mouse necessarily is bad. How I see it, it's about the type of work we do. So with the type of work, imagine you would you would edit some videos, for example. You would need to scroll around all the time, or you're editing some music. A keyboard might not be the best tool for it. You would need to, like to scroll around, like when you're playing a video game, or if you explore a website that you haven't seen before. So how I would see it is about the type of work that you do, especially if you need to type, and then reducing, well, what I call context switches, like context switches in terms of hand movements. Why? Because your hands are located on the keyboard, and I hope you do touch typing, that you don't have to look where you're typing. So, you have these tactical marks on F and J, and then, you don't have to look. But now you need to switch to your mouse. So what you do, either you use a laptop and then, your touchpad or something similar is down there, or you need to move your hands to the mouse and then back. And this always costs you some time. And this is a little friction that doesn't feel that, great, because then you need to move your mouse. So imagine I'm in my IDE here, and then I have my mouse here. I need to move like here and then click around. It's just much easier to say, okay, I'm already in this mode. So it feels much more, I would say, like a computer game. And especially with your IDE, you can definitely do that. So there's no excuse. Even with your browser, there are some tools that you can include, for example, to make some to movement there, and to just, depends what you're doing, but just try to spend more time on the keyboard. So why is the keyboard especially helpful for developers? Well, because we type, right? We type all the time. And then switching from this typing mode to the mouse, just, to click somewhere else or to select a different file doesn't really make sense. So trying to get used, to the search functionalities of the IDE, and to switch and to navigate without moving your hands off the keyboard. This is really helpful. And another tip that is a little bit, or not a tip, but I would say more a story that is connected to that, is how I actually got to use this crazy editor, Vim, which is what I use now pretty much all the time. Not necessarily the editor, but maybe you also saw that in my IDE, I have such a weird setup with this big block cursor and some weird line numbering here. It doesn't really make sense. So this is the reason why. And the reason why I got into this Vim movement, or this Vim way of typing, was actually for that reason, what I just mentioned, with reducing friction. Why is that? Well, usually when you type something and then you would like to move your cursor, you would need to use the cursor arrows to get, like left, right, and things like that. But that is already not really ideal, because on a standard layout keyboard, well, look at your keyboard, then your cursor arrows are a little bit further away. Usually most people can, slide their hands without looking, and then you feel it where these cursors are, and then you can kind of move. But then if you move back, you have to search for this J button, and then it's already some friction. And what this Vim movement does is the following, that it says in this, well, what is called normal mode, it has different layers of operation. In this normal mode, you are not typing, but you're moving around, and you can have some movement and commands. And if you want to type, you have to press a special character like I for insert and things like that. So with this, you can actually get really fast. So down here, you see what I'm typing, because once you get used to these movements, you can just say, okay, I would like to, move around here, and then you can combine it with some other substitutions and some other actions. You can move around and say, okay, repeat, things like that. So you really get to, well, edit text and to move around really quickly. So what I use nowadays for a setup, and this is not a joke, I'm either in my IDE or I'm on my command line and using Vim. So even if I write an email, I use Vim. So that's not a joke, because for me, if again, you think about what we've already seen, if you use automation, shortcut, spending more time on the keyboard, what does this look like? Well, it depends on your editor setup. But for me, it looks like something, I write an email, I open up Vim, and I say, dear sir or madam, hello world, cheers, and done. And I take this, I copy it into my email program, and I send it. So for me, this is just much faster to move around and to edit text than using some what you see is what you get tool, using the mouse and kind of like navigating your way around. Always, it feels like just the wrong tooling for being a developer. So I think some of these tips just help you if you're somewhat just consistent and following these principles that just help you to be more effective. So spend more time on the keyboard in this case means, well, use a tool in such a way that you can actually use these keyboard shortcuts. And maybe you can combine it with some automation. For example, what you just saw was also some sort of live templates now in Vim, but same story. A shortcut maybe for it, you can copy and paste stuff around. Maybe you want to use a window manager that you can use solely by the keyboard, or at least better than Windows or something like this. Again, so I use this i3 window manager. The reason for that is that I can just open up new windows and move them and make them bigger and smaller and things like that, all with the keyboard. So it's literally keyboard first, and some of the options you can also do with the mouse, but it's basically a tiling window manager just with the keyboard and some Vim type of typing and movement. So this is just really, really helpful, and I think also kind of cool. As for which keyboard I'm using right now, I don't really want to do any advertising, but this is just what I'm using now. It's called Ultimate Hacking Keyboard. There are a few keyboards right there like that. I'm not interested if you're like this model or not. And it's not about the split keyboard. Well, it is, but I'm not interested in this. But what I'm interested in is, if you see here, it has more modifier keys, and especially it has one that just I can actually show you the agent. That's easier. Especially it has one that comes with, well, switching a layer. So it has a modifier key, and if you then press this key and hold it, then it switches actually to this one. So then instead of typing, you can actually use a cursor arrow. So it's a little bit similar idea to Vim. And once you get used to it, you can really type all of these things much quicker. Because if you use your IDE, you cannot get rid of all of these keys because you need it. Like in IntelliJ, for example, Alt Insert is required. But maybe you've had this yourself, right? That when you're coding, you're in your IDE, and then you see like this one, and you say, okay, I want to generate getters and setters or something like this. I need to look down, where is Alt, where is Insert, and then press it like that. And with that, you can just press it like this without looking, because once you get used to where this key is, it's a little bit of muscle memory involved. But once you are in this learning curve, then it's just so much faster to actually press all of these keys. And the same is true for the cursor arrows here. So you can do the same thing as you see what I'm typing, without changing your hand positions. So that's actually the reason why I'm a big fan of this keyboard, or keyboards like that. There are multiple ones like that out there. You can fully program actually every single key there, which is pretty cool, I think. And then you can press these things instead of moving your hands around. So here you see even it's a different layout, so there's no block over there, because there's no need to. If you just get used to this mapping, then that's what you kind of get used to. So that's, I think, just a cool thing to try out, or a cool thing to think about. So depends on what you're doing, of course, but I would say for most of the developers, when we do some coding type of work, it really makes sense to increase the time that we spend on our keyboard. All right, and for another tip, don't wait. So don't wait in terms of reduce the waiting times and reduce the turnaround times. Why is that? Well, because we're human beings, we get distracted. So what usually happens, and we just in this track had a nice talk about testing and test containers and how to reduce the testing waiting times, and especially testing waiting times, or just in general turnaround times, are really, really bad for your productivity usually. Because I come from the enterprise world, and I come from this time when you had a big application server where something gets deployed to, and then you had to wait for minutes, really a lot of minutes, sometimes half an hour, 45 minutes until the whole thing is deployed, and that is just really bad. And it's not just about minutes, it's even about seconds. Because what happens? So if I say I would like to build and deploy something, right? So instead of saying deployed, it's deployed immediately, I say, okay, let's say it takes 1 second. Okay, now it's deployed. Or it takes 2 seconds. Okay, now it's deployed. Or you write a test. Test done. You run a test, and now the test is done. Okay, now let's increase this time and see how patient you are, right?
I hear you.
Yes, can you hear me? I hear some voices in the... Oh, sorry, I think it was a mistake from the moderator. Okay, so waiting time, let's say 3 seconds, or that already for most people gets into the area where you say, okay, this becomes annoying. And I say that should even be, for me, that's my personal sort of threshold. If things take longer than that, then typically we're really, distracted. So for example, if you have a test that only takes 10 seconds, I execute the test and now we can wait together. And then what happens, I pull out my phone and then I check, oh yeah, I haven't checked social media in a while. And then, what happens? Oh, by the way, the test is done, but I don't see it because I'm checking my phone, or I check my emails, I look at Slack. You know how this goes. This is really bad. And then our thoughts are elsewhere. We are distracted, and everything that we had in our temporary working memory is now gone. So it's really important that this also is, being considered how long something takes. And this is really in seconds. So ideally, whatever you do, it takes less than 2 seconds. And especially in an enterprise world, this is a little bit cumbersome or a little bit hard. Well, it depends on the technology that you use. I'm a very big fan of this Quarkus technology. If you don't know, well, you should. You can go to quarkus.io. It's a really nice way to write modern enterprise applications on an enterprise Java-based API. But the nice story about it, or one of the nice stories, is this development mode. That was really nice, starting actually from the beginning, but it even became better over time. And now what we can do is, where's my IDE? I can actually say, I would like to change something. So probably you have seen this approach. So probably you have seen it that, well, I can actually change whatever I would like to have in my system. So let's go to this coffee response. It just says coffee. And for example, I change something here, like exclamation mark. And then very quickly, what it does, the application restarts. Why? Because it's a special development mode that still has the connection to my source code, and it says, okay, detected some changes here, and then it very quickly restarted. So it's something like, a few milliseconds usually. And with that, or a few hundred milliseconds, and with that, it's just really quick, and I don't need to wait. I literally say, I change some code here, and then, I change the code, hit save, coffee, question mark. And what happens, I just, rerun here my test, or I press F5 on the browser or whatever you would like to do, and then I see what is happening there. Now, this is just one example for a technology, and there are a few different ways that are supported in the Java world, also in the Spring world and things like that. But just in general, we should build up an approach that works like that. We just heard a session about testing from Oleg, and it's a very important topic there as well, and also something that I care a lot about, that our tests run really quickly, which is the reason why I usually advocate for running integration tests that only connect to an already running system, which there is really fast. So what this does is actually a client that already connects to, localhost 8080 here, and then it says, check that this is equal to coffee. Well, it isn't, because it says coffee exclamation mark. I just changed my production code. So I changed the code back. I rerun the test real quick. You saw again shortcut, and now the test is green again, and I just have this fast feedback. So this is about really getting fast feedback. And with fast feedback, I mean definitely less than 2 seconds for whatever you do. Like if you restart your application, shouldn't take more than that. If you rerun your integration test, not just code level test, that's easy. Everybody can run JUnit and a few hundred tests in no time, because JUnit and code level, that's fast. But an integration test, you really have to think about what is a good way of testing to make this more efficient, to not making me wait. And it's totally fine to make some local, workarounds and some scripts, and just to hack a little bit to make this faster, at least while you're coding. Then on the CI/CD system, it's a different story. You should have a proper testing approach. But here you can say, how can I run an environment a little bit quicker? Just in terms of staying productive and not making me wait. I also have more content on that I can link to if you're interested. But in general, just try to reduce the waiting time. Really don't make you wait. Like, try to build up a system that once you're in the coding flow, doesn't make you wait for more than 2 seconds. And trust me, this works. It's fine if in the beginning you have to wait, like for some init time, to say, okay, it takes 20 seconds or a minute for everything to start up. But once it's up and running, you should be really quick. So that's very important. And related to managing time distractions, also we should try to manage, distractions in general. So this is a very important topic that is now a little bit less about just the coding space and our tooling, but just for, the overall way how we work. So especially these, phones, notifications, emails, some other websites, news, whatever that you're trying to scroll through. These are just all distractions, at least while you're trying to focus. So especially while we code, we should be able to, just ignore all of the rest. Why? Because it's a complex work and we need to keep a lot of details in our head. So our temporary working memory is totally full with all of these details and, side effects and things that we need to think about. Very important. And then if we're somewhat distracted, this feeling like boom, everything is gone, everything is on the floor, and then you have to pick it up and pick it together afterwards. So this is really not helpful. Any distractions are there, just you should really manage them. And this is why I call it manage distractions. Of course, it always depends on your situation, what you can do, and what your way of working is. But you need to manage them actively. They won't just go away. So putting your phone somewhere with your notifications on when you're in some noisy chat, then the distractions and the notifications will just come in. So what then you should do is to put it on silent, put it on flight mode, a great feature as well, at least for some time. Even if you work in a team or you need to somewhat be reachable, usually it's fine to disappear for 30 minutes or 45 or 60 and tell your coworkers, if you need me, you can I'll get back to you, but within 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And then you can set yourself a timer, so you really don't have to think about it. Once the timer with some notification, that's the only notification, pops up, then you go there and you can look in it. I understand, life circumstances are different, especially if you need to be available for emergencies or things like that. You can also manage that. Then say, okay, I have a phone with a special number just for emergencies. This is available, but only, use it for emergencies, or, set up not the silent mode for just some special context, and they know, don't distract me unless it's really, really important. And then you can do that as well, just trying to manage it and trying to see, okay, what is possible here and what sort of makes sense. So I think this is an important topic here as well. And another thing that is related in IT especially is, trying to keep learning. So if you're watching this and if you're joining some conferences, then I think you already did the right thing, because this is what you do. You're interested in hearing, hear new points of views, learning about new technologies, learning about new ways of doing. That's really important. And our industry moves very fast. I don't have to tell you that. So keep learning as long as we're developers. I can really tell the best software developers out there, and I've worked with many, 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 are the ones who keep learning, especially once we mature. So this is probably even more important to tell to senior developers than to juniors, because juniors, naturally, they have to learn a lot. But once you become more mature, and lack of a better term, you really don't try to let your ego force through to say, okay, I know everything anyway. No, you don't. Keep learning, stay humble, trying to keep an open mind, being interested in new things, and you will improve a lot. This is an important thing. And in the same token, on the opposite, trying to share knowledge. And sharing knowledge comes in many, many forms. So you can say, okay, just write some documentation. That's sharing knowledge. You can write a blog post, internally or publicly. You can use Twitter to, share some tips about IT or whatever you do. And it doesn't need to be super fancy or some, fully fledged article. How I started out with is just to, share something that I learned today. And don't think, okay, what I learned, nobody is interested, everybody knows already. No, because you didn't know about it at the start of the day, at the beginning. So now today you learned about it. So chances are that somebody else will also need or require that knowledge, that it will help somebody else as well. And then try to share that. Can be in a very easy form. Can be something bigger, like giving a talk somewhere or creating some videos or in any form. And the important thing here is that sharing knowledge will help yourself a lot as well. It's not just about, being a nice person. Well, that also, if you're sharing, that's always good. But it really benefits you even more, because when you're sharing, you need to double check and triple check if things are actually true. So that is just something, very important there as well. And on the more, soft skills and quote unquote front about this learning and managing, your work and your day. Also, what is very important, I found, is to own your time. And that doesn't mean that, oh, I don't want to work anymore or something like this. No, it means, well, I want to get an understanding of when I work in which way, in the most effective way. So, for example, you say, I really focus well in the morning, but then my manager tends to, schedule this all hands meeting in the morning, just when it would be my high productivity time, my really focused coding time. And things like that, to say, okay, really, what is, you can search online for, a builder schedule, which is very different to a manager schedule, just from the way how we work and how we think, is to say, you need these big chunks of time in order to get some quality work done. And the more they are just scattered and, cut in half, then the worse it will be. So really try to, focus on that. And then try to get an understanding when you work in the most effective way. So usually that's early in the mornings or late in the day, so in some more quiet hours for most developers at least, but you might be different. And then trying to schedule it as such. And really just, what I can show you, because this is something I created just for myself, some tooling that I wrote, because I used to use some calendar actually on a piece of paper. And now what I'm doing, I created this just a tool for myself. It's called Day Captain. You can check this out as well. Is to say, I want to create a task list, like for example, implement feature 1, 2, 3, and then fix this bug and something like that. And then, I don't know, post schedule, that I have something that I can just quickly have, first of all, in a task list. So like a daily task list, so that it is what is called compartmentalized, that you're not using, too much scope here, that I can just quickly, so you see, I of course use some keyboard shortcut, that I quickly can move around and, resort something. And also, very importantly, this is something that really surprised me, that this is not possible easily in more calendars, that you can actually assign something. So sometimes I say a task list is only wishful thinking until you actually assign some time in your calendar to say, okay, today or tomorrow from 8 to 11, I will just implement this feature. I will do nothing else. And then you have a blocker. And even more so, if then you put this into your calendar, and if somebody, tries to schedule a meeting, you're like, no, sorry, I'm busy. I have a blocker. And actually, this is, it's not just a joke. It's really important work. You're paid to do this. You're paid to do meaningful work, and then, try to schedule it as such. And then what I also, so actually for me, it was weird that a Google Calendar, for example, doesn't allow for a better keyboard integration, because now what I'm doing, and this is really, it's not a joke, that's really how I plan my days basically, is to say, I would like to, put things here, I can move them around, kind of a little bit like in a computer game, just in a keyboard way. Otherwise, it's just too cumbersome. Nobody wants to click around like that, no developer. And then I say, okay, this is what, my morning looks like, for example, and then you can continue. And with this, you tend to more own your time to say, okay, with this is what my, before noon or before the afternoon time looks like. And then if somebody else comes with a meeting request, I'm like, okay, sorry, no, this won't happen. Or you need to reschedule something like your working hours. And then you're even more accurate or more realistic about what you can get done in a day. And to say, okay, actually, sorry, we cannot do this meeting, or then this feature will be delayed or whatever, because, you tend to own your time more and have a better understanding of what you actually, of what you're actually doing or what you actually want to do. And connected to that, I think, is also to somewhat take a step back and reflect. And this goes on many levels. So connected to like time, prioritization, planning, things like that, is that you get a better understanding of how you work effectively. So for example, when you say, well, I'm, very effective in the morning, and then when I have a big lunch, then I'm always tired after lunch. So maybe it makes sense to have a longer break after lunch. Or that's what I'm doing now, to say, okay, I won't be productive directly after lunch anyway, so I just take a longer break, I go for a walk, something like this. Or depending on your schedule, depending what your needs are, if you have kids, if you just have some other requirements, trying to build this around and trying to just get a better understanding for it. And also taking a step back and reflecting helps a lot with, well, to be honest, with many other aspects in life, but also with your technical abilities. This first half, what we were talking about with regards to automation, shortcuts, command line usage. So, for example, really take a step back and ask yourself, what am I working on the whole day? So, is it something that I could improve? Is there something that I could document? Is there something that I could automate? And maybe even take some time, something like in the end of the week, like on Friday afternoon, to just, somewhat end early and think of it. Okay, this week, what actually happened? What went well? What didn't go so well? Is there something I could have improved to just make it go better? In the future, somewhat, this continuous improvement idea, to say, is there something that I then can get better? And if you slowly adopt a mindset like that, then I think you become really unstoppable as a developer. You're definitely more effective, but also I think it also is more fun. Because then when you're coding, you're focusing on actually, the deep focus, the deep work type of coding. When you're fully in the flow and just can hack around, you don't need to wait. You're using all of the cool shortcuts. You use the keyboard all the time, and it's really fun to create features and do things like that. This is another reason why I think being a developer is one of the coolest and best jobs out there. And yes, with this, I want to end it. I want to thank you very much for your attention. I hope this was interesting and helpful. I also have some material out there. I also have a course, which is a video course on this topic that you can check out. And just, if you follow me on the social media, then typically I'm posting stuff on how to become more effective as a developer in general, and especially as a Java developer, like the coolest Java programming, the coolest programming language out there. So thank you very much for your attention, and maybe we even have some time for some questions now.
Yes, thank you so much, Sebastian. You are unstoppable developer and unstoppable speaker. Thank you for the awesome speech.
Mhm.
Um, Dear participants, you have 5 minutes to write your questions in the chat, and we can discuss it with Sebastian and share even more than it was in the presentation. From my
Mhm.
side, thank you so much, Sebastian, for joining us. Thank you for supporting Devoxx Ukraine 2022 and for supporting Ukrainians. I will remind that we have a big goal for today, raise 50,000 euros for DJI MAVIC drones for our Ukrainian defenders, and it will help us to make Winner Day closer. And while we are waiting for some questions, maybe some short one or two recommendations from you to summarize your speech.
Well, to summarize, if I would need to summarize it to a few tips, I would say especially automations and some shortcuts, because this is usually something that we can do in a somewhat, like, in an easier way, right? You have your IDE, just look at the typical things you do, trying to find some shortcuts there. And as a second tip, maybe a command line, because I don't know any developer who's using the command line who ever regretted it. So if you say, okay, once you get used to it, once you learn a little bit more about it, especially on a Unix system, and even with Windows, you can use a Unix command line these days. It's just really helpful, and it makes you, just it improves how you use the computer. And also, if a non-IT person watches you, they think you are a really cool hacker, and what you're doing. This looks really nice. So you have to be careful that on a plane. I've used this because I used a command line all the time, and when I was traveling a lot and on an airplane, and people next to me watch me like, "What are you doing? Are you hacking the airplane or something like this?" I'm like, "No, no, this is my usual working setup. I'm just writing a book or something like that." And yeah, this can become funny as well.
Thank you so much. And we have a question from Danik. How long would it take to learn Vim from zero to gain
Hmm.
productivity with default typing mode?
Yes, that's a very good question. So for me, it took about Well, about, to be honest, 2 weeks to get, not to get super productive, but to get to the same speed when not using them. Because in the beginning, it's a little bit confusing, and sometimes you will make mistakes. So maybe you want to try it out when no coworkers are watching, because in the beginning you feel like you're learning how to type. But then after a few days, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, you will be at the same speed. So then you think, okay, this is not a real big win. But then afterwards you will improve, and then it's already because we're developers for a long time, for years, then I think it already made sense. And then the longer you use, especially in the beginning, for the first 2 months or something, then you will become really effective in it. So I think that's a nice investment of your time to then be more productive. So maybe something around 2 weeks. So from my experience, how it took me.
2 weeks, it's not so much to become an unstoppable developer. I think it definitely a good price for this. Okay, we have one more question regarding wait time. What if test to run is managed by other team and you can't manage that wait time? What's your recommendations?
Yes, that's a good question. With other teams, so if it's another team that tests your software, then it should also be a little bit your responsibility, because it's your software or your project that you're writing. And then it's a question, what I would do is then just talk to them and say, hey, what is your test actually doing? Maybe I can help you. You can share some code, and then we can see if we can make this a little bit faster, especially if the tests in the enterprise use like HTTP or use like Selenide or Selenium for HTML. This should be really fast, so there's no excuse that these take too long. If for some reason you don't have access to the code, or they don't want to, something like this, then I would try to separate it a little bit, is to see, okay, can you boil it down to just a few tests of the features that you're working on right now? Or maybe make this a separate step in the CI/CD pipeline, or just not run it all the time, or even go as far to say the most important thing I test myself. So I even write my own test, although the other team then also have a different test suite, which in general is just also a good recommendation always, because when I'm writing a code, I usually want to test my own code as well, because I just want to make sure that it works well. And while I'm developing, and if I rerun my test, I'm also more efficient in the long term if I have good tests. So it's not just, I'm finished, you send it over, and they're like, no, here's a bug and here's a bug. Okay, now I fixed this bug, now I'm finished. No, here's a new bug, right? So you want to have your own test suite. And if it's not possible to work with the other team for some reason, then I would probably say you might want to write a few own tests that don't have to be super complex or many, but just a few that really help you to work, to program more efficiently.
Okay, thank you so much. We don't have more questions, but dear participants, you can share your feedback. Maybe you was enjoyed, so it will be great to hear your voice from the audience, how it was. And for you, Sebastian, thank you so much. Thank you for wearing Java Day Odessa t-shirt. Maybe see you next year in Devoxx, Ukraine, in Kiev, Odessa, or Ukrainian Crimea. Hope to do it.
Yes. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Irina. And thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.